Have you ever felt?
Are you listening? Damn.
Hello fellow fly tiers, this is Lance Egan with Fly Fish Food. I want to share with you one of my favorite nymph imitations. This one I call the Iron Lotus, the fabled Iron Lotus. If you are into dumb movies like Blades of Glory, you might know where the name for this one came from. Anyhow, this guy is a kind of a Baetis nymph imitation and kind of not, kind of an attractor at the same time. So to start, I've got a Hannock 400 jig hook in the vise. You can see that it has a 60-degree bend on it, and then I've got a 2.3 millimeter slotted bead that fits right over the top of that. It is nice to note and crucial to note the slotted bead rather than a countersunk bead. The slotted beads just sit on these jig hooks a little bit better. Okay, so I'm going to start by wrapping a little bit of lead around the shank of this hook. I like to use lead on my flies because I mostly, when I'm nymph fishing, mostly do European style nymphing. And when we're doing Euro style nymphing, we like to add weight. So I've got a tungsten bead in 2.3 millimeter, slotted as I mentioned, and then I'm going to wrap about 6 or 8 turns of 010 lead wire right around the shank there. I'm going to push those wraps up into the bead and then break off the excess here using my fingernail. Then I'm going to push those up in the bead. I'm going to try and wiggle them up so they almost seat right up inside the bead, pushing from the back, getting them to seat inside that bead. Okay, that'll kind of hold them in place temporarily. Next, I'm going to add some olive UTC 70 denier, and I'm going to build a little bit of a thread ramp up right behind the lead wire that pushes the lead back into the bead. So I've got some tension on it there, and I'm going to then wrap over the top of the lead to really hold it in place, and then wrap back down towards the bend to place my tail. Alright, so next up we're going to add the tail material. This is Coq de Leon in medium Pardo, dark Pardo, really any of them will work, but Coq de Leon is nice because it's got a lot of speckling to it, and it has a lot of sheen. It's also a very durable fiber, so I like this on a lot of my nymphs. So I'm going to pull maybe, I don't know, 8 to 10, 12 fibers off the back of that and make a fairly sparse tail. And I like to make this tail maybe about 2/3 of the length of the shank, somewhere in there. No shorter than half, certainly no longer than the shank of the hook. And there I've got it tied in right on top. Alright, next up we're going to add some of our ribbing material, which in this case is thread, Unithread 6/0 in white. This thread is going to act as our segmentation. So I'm going to tie it in right behind the lead to try and thin out that, or I guess really taper that body, make the body a bit more even. And then I'm going to make sure that I get the lead covered with this olive thread. Okay, now that I've got that well covered, I'm going to twist this Unithread in 6/0 white, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap it the opposite direction that I wrapped the olive thread. So I'm going to counter wrap. The reason for doing this is that it makes it so that the white thread doesn't seat between wraps of the olive thread. It really stands out on top, makes a nice segmented look to the fly. Then I'm going to get rid of the excess of that 6/0, and at this point I'm going to whip finish the olive thread and just get rid of it altogether. Okay, so there's our fly partially finished. Still got some of those rogue threads back there. I got rid of most of them. You can see it's got segmentation. It's kind of olive and white. Most Baetis nymphs have lighter ribbing to them and more of a darker body. What I'm going to do now is make this body much more durable. The original Iron Lotus, I used a product called Gudbrand Rod Finish, but because Gudbrand is no longer around, and because of the ease of use of these resins, I now use Loon Flow, so it's some of their UV Flow. The nice thing about this Loon stuff is that it's, one, it's really, really easy to work with, and two, it sets up really quickly, where the old Gudbrand stuff that I used, you had to stick it on there and wait for it to dry for, an hour or two before you could really do the next steps. You'd have to tie a bunch of them at a time. This stuff you can manipulate. It's not sticky, so you can move it around a little bit with a bodkin. You can do whatever you like. I've got a little bit of an ugly bump right there you can see. That's probably from where my thread was. I'm going to smooth it out a little bit, right? And then it's manageable until I hit it with this UV light. So I'm going to hit it with my Loon Magnum UV light. And that will set it up immediately, making the fly then really, really durable, and also adding quite a bit of sinking capabilities to it. If you just have a dubbed body or something like that, they tend to sink slower. So now that I've just had that light on there for just a few seconds, it's all set up. There we go. All right, next up I'm going to add this UTC 70 in red right behind the bead. And I'm going to tie in a wing case. The wing case on this fly is Wapsi flashback tinsel in black. It's a jet black material. You could also use thin skin if you'd like, but the thin skin's a little bit thicker, so I prefer this particular product. And I've just got that tied in over the back. And the last step is to add a little bit of dubbing, which is Arizona synthetic peacock dubbing and just the natural peacock. It doesn't take very much of this. Like always with dubbing, less is more. You want to make a really thin noodle, especially this particular dubbing is a bit on the, it's short fibered, but it's fairly coarse. So the more you try and pack on the thread at once, the worse that it looks, and the less it goes on there. So we don't really want very much of it on there, just enough to create a little bit of a thorax. Then I'm going to take this little Stonfo brush and just tease the dubbing to either side, kind of flatten out the top of the thorax. And then I'm going to pull the wing case material over the top, capture it with the thread, and then pull it backwards. And if I have any of those dubbing fibers that are left, I can force them back with my fingers and hold them in place with the thread. Now, before I cut that off, I'm going to whip finish. And what I like to do here is create a bit of a red band behind the bead. There's something magic about these little hot spots on these nymphs. If you take this same fly and you tie it in all olive without the red collar, for me it just doesn't fish as well. So I've got a nice little red collar. I like the contrast, the gold bead, the red collar, the dark thorax, and then the segmented body. So the last step is to come in here with your scissors and trim away the excess of that wing case. So if you look at it under magnification, you can still just barely see the little trimming that I've got there, but because that wing case is folded over now, it won't slip out. And then one more trick, because some of these dubbing fibers are a little bit long and gangly, I'm just going to come in and give them a bit of a haircut. I do want them sticking out because I want them imitating legs, but the legs are not usually 4 times the length of the body, so we're going to get them to a little more manageable size. And there we have it, a finished iron lotus. Not too much to it, a pretty simple pattern. Again, you can play with it in lots of colors. It's also available in a PMD version, but that's a little more rusty colored. But I use this olive and white version the very, very most. It produces really well for me, both on picky tailwater fish and on free stones alike. Give it a whirl. I think you'll like it.